Okay, so in this video, I want to talk about HMOs briefly, just like we did in the service accommodation video, and just explain what it is, how it works, and how you can profit from it. So in brief, we have one house, effectively, and the house needs to be really, I think, minimum 4 beds, but in an ideal 5 or 6. So, I think that's where it really works, but you can sometimes execute it with 4 beds. Now, what we do is a bit like service accommodation. We've got to furnish it, put bills in. I know some landlords don't, they put the bills on the tenants, but still furnish it. I just go all inclusive. For me, HMOs, I go for the professional market, and I think that people are quite transient. So they might be, young professionals, maybe moving to an area, finding their first job, just want to make sure that they, pass their probation periods, they stay in the area, they like it, etc., before they actually set any ground rules down and maybe rent a house of their own. So some people like this style of living because they get to socialize and meet other people. So there's a multitude of reasons why people do this, but done correctly, they work. But there's also a lot of competition, so you've got to make sure your standard's pretty good. So I like to include everything. I think just make it ease of entry, so they've got nothing to worry about apart from just paying their rent each month and just living in their room, and obviously trying to make the houses sociable so people enjoy their time living together. So it's really important that you think about the mix of people. You don't want to mix students with professionals. You don't want to mix older people with younger people. You don't want a young 19-year-old going out every night, coming home to, someone who's in their late 40s. Whilst the person in the late 40s will say it's okay on the recruitment process, it's only a matter of time before friction starts, and then ultimately you have to deal with that. So we are always very conscientious about mixing the right groups of people in houses and making sure that they're a good fit. So, and I think that's important to your operational profits. It is really, really important. So what we basically have is one house. Let's assume a 5-bed house in Newcastle would rent for anywhere between £800 and £1,000 a month. So that's what we would get as a standard AST. Whereas we might have a 5-bed house, and what we would do is charge £500 per room. So assuming all rooms were equal size and you could charge the same amount, obviously you don't want to be charging more to somebody for a smaller size room than somebody else in the household, or you come on that friction point again. So 5 rooms, so 5 times 500 is obviously 2,500. So rather than getting £1,000 or £800, we're going to get 2,500 quid for the same property, rented in a very similar way. So we just treat each room as a property. So each room has its own tenant, it has its own AST, it's got locks on the doors. Now, there's a lot involved with HMOs in terms of fire safety and regulations, and you've got to make sure that you tick all those boxes. But it shouldn't scare you off getting into this strategy because, done correctly, it's a very powerful strategy and it's a very profitable strategy. So if you've got to spend a bit of money getting a license, then spend the money. If you've got to spend a bit of money getting fire doors, spend the money, because it's a worthwhile investment in the long run, especially if you own the property. So get the setup right at the beginning, and then you can maximize the profit by renting the rooms. Now, on your research that you're going to do, you're going to figure out what locations work for HMOs. Not all locations work for it. So you've got to make sure that the locations work. And that's why the research that you're going to do next is fundamental. You don't just want to go, okay, there's a 5-bed house in that location, I'll go rent an HMO, because it might not work. There might not be the tenant demand to live there. People, they tend to want to be near city centres, HMOs. That's where they work the best. But doing your research for your area, you'll figure out what you should be paying for the properties, what room rents you can get in that areas, and what the demand is like versus the supply. So dive into the research now. If you've got any more questions on HMOs as a strategy, pop them into the group. And if not, dive into the research, find your area, and then pop into the Facebook group. Let everyone know where you're going to be operating your HMOs. And you just never know, there might be people in the group that are operating in the same locations and might be able to give you a bit of advice. So hope that helps. As I said, any more questions, but dive into the research now and get that completed.